right. Hey, TCSTV viewers and everyone here at the camera store tonight. I'm Evelyn from the camera store, and we are live. And before we get started, I want to let you know that today we're here to learn how to get the most out of your Nikon Z9, and that's featuring the new 2.0 firmware that just dropped a few days ago, so you can get that online and put it on your camera and unlock some new cool features that Chris is going to talk about. I also want to thank Nikon Canada for making this happen. They flew the wonderful Chris in from Nikon Canada to come and chat with all of us tonight and give us our first ever hybrid event. So we have an in-store audience, and we're also going live on the YouTube channel. And this is thanks to the TCSTV Live Dream team at the back. And tonight we have everyone on deck. We have Drew, Jeff, Gary, and Dave, and they make all of these great events happen. And I also want to thank Delkin for setting up a giveaway. And so at the end of the presentation for our in-store guests, we are going to give away a Delkin Black 128 gigabyte card in either an SD or a CF Express Type B. And these are awesome memory cards, so stay tuned for that draw. We also want to encourage you guys to ask questions. So whether you're in here in person or you're at home, you can ask questions in the YouTube chat or put up your hand, obviously, if you're in front of us.
Or if you're sitting here and you want to go into the YouTube chat to ask your question, you can do that too.
You could do that too, absolutely. And of course, I want to introduce Chris, who is from Nikon Canada, and he's been with Nikon for over 12 years and is currently the product and training manager, and he helps to remove the mystery of all the technical aspects of photography, which is what he loves doing, whether it's to advanced hobbyists and everyone who's striving to learn more, or pro photographers who are pushing their gear to the limits. And of course, the Nikon Z9 is really all about that, just pushing the limits of what you can do with your gear. And so, Chris, thanks so much for coming in.
My pleasure.
Yeah, take it away.
All right, so welcome everybody for coming in, and everybody who's watching on YouTube. So we're going to be kind of hitting a number of topics today. Like I've said, if you guys have questions, you can absolutely feel free to ask me during the presentation. I have no problem, because if we wait till the very end, then I guarantee that little thing that you were like, wait a second, that menu, it'll be completely out of your brain. So feel free, interrupt me. Anybody online, if you ask that question, and anybody monitoring the chat, if they think that it makes sense, feel free to interrupt me there as well. So what are we here today to talk about? Well, we're obviously here to talk a little bit about the Z9, just a little bit. And we're going to talk about the Firmware 2.0, how we really kind of took an already amazing camera and made it even better. And the amazing thing about that is just in such a short period of time from when we started shipping it to when we came out with Firmware 2.0. But I'm going to stop right there, because quickly I do want to talk about this. Now, I do apologize for the people watching live. You do not have the ability to come and hold and feel this lens, which these lovely people do. So I'm only going to talk a few things about this lens, because I could go on for a very, very long time. The couple major points are the size and the weight. And you can tell that I'm just very easily throwing this around here. It is much, much smaller and much, much lighter. We're talking 16% smaller than the 800mm f5.6, the DSLR version, and over 50% lighter when you take into consideration that the 800mm had the FTZ as well. So really, if anybody here wants to come up and play with it, absolutely feel free. But one of the big things about it is, yes, it's smaller, yes, it's lighter, but at this kind of caliber of lens, people really need that image quality to go along with it. So if the image quality isn't there, then are people going to be willing to go and spend the money and carry it around, even though it is small for an 800mm? Well, when you look at the image quality of it, it is absolutely amazing. It really, truly is. When you zoom in and you take a look at some of the details that are available for what is the smallest kind of exotic, for me, exotic is like that high-end lens that people strive for. The detail is absolutely amazing. And yes, it is a third of a stop slower than the older 800, but I think most photographers, wildlife birding photographers, will absolutely take that 1/3 of a stop when they save that much size and weight. All right, so let's jump on into the Z9, because I know that's what most of you are here. I see a lot of Z9s in the actual audience, which is fantastic. So let me actually go and talk about Firmware 2.0. Now, when it comes to 2.0, when we launched the camera back in 2021, the last of 2021, we did say that we were going to be doing an additional firmware that was going to increase the video capabilities for the Z9. So a lot of the video users went, all right, that's amazing. But the still photographers went, all right, I'm happy with the camera as it is now. I'm not going to worry about that. And then we came out with it, and people really realized how much of a push forward it was, not just on the video side, but really for stills as well. So for launch, the Z9 already had a lot of major kind of step-ups that you wouldn't really expect from, to be totally honest, Nikon. We have been making small steps to get bigger and bigger in the video world, but a lot of this really, really pushed us up there. But with Firmware 2.0, it stepped it up that much further. So I'm not going to go through every single one of these because I'm going to talk about individually them as we kind of go through it. But Firmware 2.0, and I've heard a lot of people say this, it wasn't just a small little step. It wasn't, oh yeah, we're going to fix a few little bugs, we're going to fix some language issues that we had. This is, I've heard a lot of people say it, a Z9S. It really is. If we were looking back at the D3, D4 days, it would not just be some minor little adjustment. This would be a new camera when you kind of take into consideration how many improvements on the video and still side we really crammed in. So when it comes to video, the hybrid shooter is really where we're kind of aiming this camera, because obviously it's amazing at stills, but it's also amazing for video as well. So there's a lot of people that obviously kind of filter into that hybrid shooter, and they're really looking for that smaller footprint, the smaller budget. And don't get me wrong, I know that this is not a cheap camera, but in the same breath, when you look at all the things it's capable of doing, there really isn't much else out there that can really match it. All right, so let's get into the 2.0 on the video side. First one being raw video. Anybody here in the audience shoot a lot of video? Anybody shoot raw? Okay, so we have a couple of the Camera Star staff, and to be totally honest, that's an okay answer, because I will be very honest with you, and they'll probably agree with me. Raw video is not for everybody. I would guess that if I said who here shoots raw images, most, if not everybody, would put up their hand, and you may shoot JPEG on the odd occasion, but you're like, yeah, I can shoot raw stills. Why can't I shoot raw video? And they're kind of shaking their heads back there going, no, it's not that easy. Raw video is not that easy. So it really, truly is a major, major leap forward. It can be very beneficial to you because you do get larger tonality, so you get 12-bit raw video. You have much better ability to color grade your files, and you do get a higher dynamic range. So you're going to have a little bit more flexibility in the post-processing when you are grading it. But does everybody need that? Well, not necessarily. But if you are curious about it, some of the high-end specs we have now with the ability to shoot ProRes RAW, all this is internal, so you can do 4.1K full frame, and then you have a couple different options whether you want to shoot DX or 2.3 times crop, and you get that at 24, 30, or 60p. But we also have something brand new, and this is NRAW. So this is our own proprietary Nikon NRAW for the video side of things. And one of the biggest benefits of it is how it's half the size of ProRes RAW. So that means that when we're going and utilizing the fastest speed card, so the Delkin card out here, or the one that we, Nikon, actually kind of give the stamp of approval for, is the ProGrade Cobalt cards. If you're not using a ProGrade Cobalt, and you're not using, okay, now, from Japan, we're saying ProGrade Cobalt. I've tested the Delkin Black Series, and from my limited testing, this is unofficial for anybody who wants to go and write down that Chris said that it's, no, this is unofficial, but from the testing that I've done, the Delkin Black Series seems to be about the same speed as the ProGrade Cobalt. But if you do have any other card, we're talking Sony, SanDisk, Angelbird, any of those, from what I have seen, the sustained write speed is not fast enough, and you cannot go and shoot raw internally. That's just my little disclaimer. All right, so NRAW, half the size of ProRes RAW, and what that means is we're able to get over 8.3K of raw video. This is up to 60p, which is absolutely crazy. Now, to give you an idea why this may not be for everybody, on top of the fact that you need to have the fastest cards out there, if you have, let's say, ProGrade Cobalt 650 gig card, and you're going to shoot at 8K 60p, anybody want to guess how many minutes worth of footage you get? 15. 15. So if you're in the world of shooting raw video, that's, yeah, okay, that makes sense type of number. But for most other users, that just blows their mind and go, whoa, 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 whoa. Did you just say 15 minutes out of a 650 gigabyte card? So that's one of the reasons why you don't necessarily always need to jump into raw video. But for the people who need it, it really gives you the ability to slow that video down if you do want to go and shoot at 60p. Now, the bigger thing that I would say most video users are going to be excited about is the fact that we now have full pixel readout at 4K 60p. So 60p, obviously, if you're going to be slowing that footage down and oversampled, well, what does that mean? That means that we're essentially taking every single pixel and we're downsampling it to the 4K size. So you're taking an 8.3K image and you're downsampling it to 4K. That's going to give you a sharper image and it's going to give you better noise at high ISOs. All in all, it's a very good thing. Already we were doing oversampling at 24 and 30p. Now, with a menu setting, you can go and turn it up into 60p as well. Now, for any other video people, we do now have waveforms. So with waveforms, you have a couple different ways. You do have to jump into the menu a little bit to get there. So if you think that you're going to be turning the camera into video mode, hitting the display button and going to cycle right into it, that is not the case. I will recommend you will have to dive in a little bit more and turn it on. And you have two different options. You can either have the large size right in the middle, or you have a smaller size in the bottom right-hand corner. You also get a small little around all the edges, the red recording frame. I can tell you I've been recording videos now with the Z9 for quite a while, if anybody has seen my kitchen videos. And I'm doing them all by myself, so I'm running over, hitting the record button, running into place, hoping the camera focuses, does all that. But I need to make sure that the camera's actually recording. And when you're doing everything, hitting the mics, you're not always looking at all the details. That is a very, very nice thing to have, just to make sure it is recording when you think, and it's stopped recording when you hopefully have turned it off. Now this is a fun little option. You have the ability to change the speed with one button push when you're recording video. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, let's say you have, I'm following kind of down the aisle here, and I'm trying to focus with a really nice, smooth, slow focus pull. So I've set the camera to slow in terms of the speed that it's going to pull at. But I get here, and all of a sudden I realize, nope, I want really quick to pan to this gentleman here. So if I've customized the AF on button to be fast AF on, I can, let's say, let the camera do its own thing. I'm in AFF mode. It's tracking, and then with one button push, it's now fast AF on, going to lock on. I get off that AF on button, and it's going to go back to the nice smooth focus pull. So if I continue walking around, it's now going to be tracking him nice and smooth. So for video users who are kind of running and gunning, wanting to give the camera some control, but still have the ability to take over if you want, this is a really, really nice little feature. So as you can see on the video side of things, there are a lot of features that we added. Now, most of these, there's a few other little ones that I didn't really talk about. Video info display, it just gives you nice clear reading of all your settings. You can really fine tune your ISO down to 1/6 of a stop. So there is a lot extra there, but I covered a lot of the main ones today, and all of those were included free, which is amazing. On the photo side though, this is where I think a lot of people, I'm assuming in the audience at least, since not a lot of people are probably pushing video too much, this is where a lot of people I think are getting excited, because right off the bat we're having something new called pre-release capture. Now, pre-release capture essentially means if you're in the C30 or the C120 modes, that's 45 megapixel, 30 frames a second, or 11 megapixels at 120 frames a second. I won't show it here, I won't pull it up, but you'll see a little icon on the top right of your frame that will show kind of multi-frames. And when you have it turned on in the camera, as soon as you press and hold, you'll see a little green light pop up. As soon as you see that green light, that means that the camera is internally buffering. So as you're holding it, as you're tracking your subject, the camera's thinking, and it's not doing it yet, but it has the ability to record all the images before the action was actually recorded with your press of a button. So in this case with the baseball player, you're pressing the shutter halfway, you actually press it here, but if you wanted one of these other frames beforehand, before you miss the action. And if anybody shoots wildlife or sports, you know, if you saw the action with your eye, chances are you missed it because it's already gone by the time you press that button. So usually you would have been stuck with some of these shots. But because with pre-release capture, you have the ability to record up to a full second before, you now have the ability to capture that bird before it flies off its perch, or the shortstop as he's diving for that ball. There we go. Now, one of the other things that I think a lot of people are really excited for is the customizable autofocus options. So we have a lot of different options that I'll talk about in a few, but now you have wide area small, wide area large, and then you have your custom 1 and custom 2. The custom 1 and custom 2 are what you're seeing being done here. You have 20 different options that you're able to essentially change to whatever it is you shoot. So if you're going and shooting tennis, if you want a long horizontal box that's not going to get picked up, or no, that's not going to pick up the net at all, that's what you can customize it. If you know you're going to be shooting a subject like this, where you don't necessarily know exactly where they're going to be popping up, you can go and do this very, very simply. So having the ability to choose 2 of them, and within those 2, you're able to customize one of the 20 different options. That's a pretty awesome feature. Now this is one that I think a lot of people didn't think was possible when we came out with the camera. So when we came out with the Z9, the refresh rate of the EVF was 60 hertz. And in actual use, because of our technology we have that basically takes a stream and gives one stream to the sensor and one stream directly to the EVF. I don't know for anybody have an issue with the EVF where you said, oh, this low resolution is too, I can't use this camera. No, I've never heard anybody say that when it comes to the Z9, but we made it even better. So now you have the ability to go and turn it into 120 hertz, which just gets it even smoother as you're actually panning with a subject, as you're trying to, let's say, track somebody who's moving really erratically. It makes it that much easier. And then if you are a video user, we also did do a development announcement for this new accessory, which I'm putting it up here, but we really can't talk about it at all because there's very little information. It's just a small little teaser to say, hey, if you are a video user, there's even more coming out for you. And I see a shaking head going, why can't you tell me more? All right, so any questions so far about the Firmware 2.0?
The pre-release capture, I assume back button focus, same thing, right? When you're pressing it back?
Yes, yes. So if you are, the question was, if you're a back button focuser, if you're activating focus there, will you still get that pre-release? And the answer is absolutely. Whether you're focusing with the shutter button or the back, you'll see the little green symbol pop up, and it'll let you know that you're good to go.
We have a question from the live chat. Do you expect 8K ProRes RAWs, 60 frames per second, in your discussions with Apple or Adobe to support NRAW?
I don't know. That's something we'll have to see. And this is just a guess. This is not an official Nikon answer. But when you consider the amount of data that we're pushing out as it's recording, let's say that 8K in NRAW, if NRAW can only be kept up with the fastest cards, the Pro Grade Cobalt, the Delkin Black Series, I don't know because got to keep in mind the NRAW is half the size of the equivalent ProRes RAW. So if we had 8K ProRes RAW, imagine how much more data we'd be trying to push to the card. So unofficially, I have a feeling that might be the bottleneck of the actual data throughput to the card itself, but we'll have to wait and see. All right, so let's now jump into and start talking about some of the kind of customizations. Now, as I kind of mentioned to the group here, there's only so much I can talk about. Anybody who's played with the Z9 knows that there's a bit of a learning curve. Even if you owned a D850, even if you owned a D5, a D6, and you knew those cameras back to front, the Z9, there's still even more for you to learn. So there's 3 hours worth of this discussion that I could have, and the lovely people here, you people at home, sitting there at home with your coffee or your beer, you'd probably be fine. I don't want to keep these people hostage. So there's only so much I can do, but if you are curious about certain things that I don't cover, absolutely feel free, throw it in the chat, or you guys can bring it up as well. So first I want to talk about not so much a customization, but I really want to describe and kind of just make sure everybody's on the same page when it comes to subject detection, how it works with Nikon, and what autofocus modes I kind of recommend at this point. So right off the bat, we're able to, with the Z9, detect 9 different subjects all at once. Now, the major benefit of that is you do not have to worry about switching from animal detect to people detect to vehicle detect as you see those different subjects pop up. You can leave it on auto, and the camera's going to do it all for you. So if I have my dog running, boom, lock onto that. If I have my kid running, boom, lock onto him. And then a car drives by, and I go and lock onto that. So it saves you a lot of time and a lot of effort. And to be honest, it saves you a customizable button that you would have to jump back and forth to. So this right off the bat is really, really welcome for a lot of users. Now, which of the autofocus modes use subject detection? Well, it's all the ones in yellow there. So wide area small, wide area large, the new C1, C2, 3D tracking, and auto area. If you do want, because I do get asked all the time, can you turn subject detection off? The answer is yes. Have I found a situation where I absolutely need to? I personally haven't, but if you do want to, it is there. And I will talk about later on a way to quickly customize just with one button push to be able to turn that on or off, depending on what it is you want. All right, so out of all of these different modes, there's obviously, or there's usually, with most cameras out there, one autofocus mode that you kind of lean more towards. And usually, let's say DSLR, or even, let's say a Z6 II, Z7 II, there's usually kind of situational dependence for when you would recommend one over the other. For the Z9, personally, and this is me personally, I'm finding 3D tracking does 95% of what I want the camera to do. And the reason for this is it gives me the ability, and you'll see in this example here. So you see the box tracking there, and you're able to get passive subject detection. So the subject detection, if you put the autofocus box near where your subject is, it'll automatically pick it up. Now, the nice thing about this is it gives you a couple different things. It's going to give you the specificity as a user to be able to say, I want his left eye. And by me locking in, the camera's able to say, jump onto his left eye. And then as I go and recompose the shot, it's going to go and lock onto and continue to lock onto his right eye. So for me, it's kind of a nice mix where a lot of people were comfortable with single point because it gave them the ability to be very specific as to what they want to tell the camera to focus on. But at the same time, it gives them the whole frame to kind of recompose their shot as the action is unfolding. So that's one of the big things that I love about 3D. Now, does it work for everybody in every situation? Well, in this shot here, sequence here, yes, it worked perfectly. 419 individual shots, and every single one of them is perfectly in focus. But, and this is a big but, now, before I go to this next slide, I want to tell everybody here and everybody at home, any camera, I'm not talking Z9, I'm talking literally any camera, doesn't matter if it's Nikon or any other brand, any camera can falter at some point. Regardless of how good it is, you can always make it fail to some degree, right? So, while the Z9 is amazing, it is not always going to be perfect. I want to stress that. Even though my boss is sitting here right now and she's giving me the evil eye, every camera on the market can falter at least a little bit. And as good of a tool as it is, there is some thinking that the photographer still has to do. Everybody with me? Okay. Because what I don't want us to get into the habit of is to think that I'm just a dumb monkey behind this camera who's just closing my eyes and shooting, and the camera's going to do it all for me. It's going to do a lot of it, but there are still some times when we need to think just a little bit. So in the situations where you might find that 3D doesn't work for your particular situation, what do I recommend? Well, first off, let's talk about when it may not be the best choice. And one of those, let's say, so this bird example here, the 3D tracking, it's mainly, well, not mainly, it's going to use subject detection, it's going to use contrast, it's going to use brightness, it's going to use distance values, but it's also going to use color. So that's key. Now, if you look at this example here, well, you have a brown bird on a green background. So that's a pretty good differentiator that you're going to have. Well, what happens if you have a subject and a background that are very similar in color tones and they're relatively close together? So there's good separation there. You saw a pretty good out of focus background. What happens if you have a brown bird flying in front of some brown trees and it's only 5-10 feet in front of it? Well, in that case, it may get a little bit fooled because it is really going to be looking at the color aspect of it. Also, if the camera, the subject is quite small in the frame and you combine all those other things, so at that point, I really recommend wide area. Now, personally, I like wide area large, but I know a lot of photographers are loving wide area small, and now obviously with Firmware 2.0, you can just go nuts. You can choose any different combination and size that fits your situation. So I'm not going to delve into which of those is best. That's going to be a little bit for you to figure out based on what it is you're actually shooting. But for me, I find wide area will, on the grand scheme of things, be nearly perfect. I say nearly perfect because the amazing thing about 3D is it gives you the compositional freedom. With wide area, you still have to go and think a little bit ahead of where is your subject going to be, place the autofocus box within that area zone, and then make sure that it stays within that zone throughout the entire sequence. All right, now, I haven't talked about dynamic at all tonight. Now, if I had done this same presentation, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago when we brought out the D850, I probably only would have talked about the dynamic modes because D5, D500, D850, D6, dynamic was my go-to. You told me you're shooting sports, dynamic. You told me you're shooting wildlife, dynamic. It was a really, really good combination that did so much, but when it comes to the Z9, it has no subject detection. So one of the biggest benefits of the Z9 is its ability to kind of think ahead and know what your subject is even before you, the photographer, are actually pressing that shutter. So you're almost throwing away some of the biggest benefits of the Z9 by using dynamic. So why do we even include it? Well, there are some good reasons. Now, this is more anecdotal, things that I have personally seen, but when you have examples like this, where you have splashes of water coming up in front of the subject, or you guys are in Alberta, you get a lot of snow. If you go and shoot, let's say, winter sports, you have a skier coming up off a jump and kicking some snow up in front of you and the subject. I've found, and this isn't just Nikon, by the way, I found mirrorless in general does this a lot. The tendency when utilizing some of the subject detection is it's to jump to the closest subject. So it's going to be, let's say, that snow that's kicked up, or in this case, the water droplets. Dynamic, I'm finding, doesn't have that issue at all. So if you are shooting in situations where you have spray, where you have things that are constantly kind of jumping up, that's when I really recommend going and switching into dynamic. But for me, and again, this is just me, this is not Nikon Chris, this is just Chris. Personally, I'm not using dynamic very much. It's 3D, then wide, and then dynamic if I do need it. All right, so how would I set up my camera for image quality? So one of the great things about the camera is, yes, it's 45 megapixels, but for everybody, that isn't necessarily a benefit all the time. Now, when you look at a Z7 II, there are a lot of raw options. You can go 14-bit, 12-bit, lossless compressed, uncompressed. Do you want to go raw medium, raw small? There's so many different ways to kind of fine-tune it, and a lot of people just kind of close their eyes and go with the biggest. That works, but you may not be getting the ultimate file size or file quality if you kind of don't do the testing and figure out which is best. So what do we have in the Z9? Well, we only have 3 options. It's always going to be 45 megapixels, and it's always going to be 14-bit. Say that again, always 45 megapixels, always 14-bit, because that is key. Now you have lossless compression, high efficiency star, and high efficiency. 2 brand new options that we've never had in any camera. And these are personally what I think, what really helps the Z9 be good for so many different types of users. Because if you take this example that I'm going to show you, as I unplug and replug, all right, so I'm going to do hand signals, and I'm going to spell out for you guys exactly what it is I'm talking about. So, one of the big benefits of going with the Z9, with the high efficiency star and the high efficiency, is when you look at it in comparison to a Z7 II, specifically, come on, yeah. Specifically when you compare it to the raw medium and the raw small of the Z7 II, you're getting 25 megapixels and 11 megapixels respectively. And look at the file size, around 28 to, or 26 to 32 and 18 to 24. With the Z9, there we go. With the Z9, you're always getting 45 megapixels, 14-bit. And look at that, the HE star is roughly the same file size as the raw medium, and the high efficiency is roughly the same file size as a raw small. But you're getting full 45 megapixels at 14-bit. Now, what's the catch? There really isn't one. I've done a lot of testing. DP Review just came out with a whole bunch of testing on their site as well. I'm pretty much only shooting HE star at this point. And a lot of testing I've seen that Japan has done, that I've had some of our ambassadors do, I cannot tell a difference. Visually, pixel peeping when I go in, I cannot tell a difference between the two. I have been told that high efficiency, you could possibly see the smallest little possible difference if you're zooming into like 400% and you're looking at really, really high contrast zones around an area of high detail. Okay, how many of us are going to be doing that? And if we are doing that, we know that our output is going to be 5 by 7 feet. We're not going to be doing small little prints. We're doing fine art type stuff. And at that point, you're going to be going and shooting at a higher quality size anyway. So, long story short, for me personally, high efficiency star is the way I'm going. Now, the one thing I will say about that is, depending on the third-party software editor that you're using, such as maybe Capture One, I do not believe that as of right now and at the end of April that they actually have compatibility with high efficiency options, whether it's star or the regular. So if you are a Capture One user and you want to shoot RAW, then obviously you are relegated to lossless compressed file type. I'm hoping, we're all, I think, hoping that they go in and have an update for that. We will have to wait and see. But other than that, if you are using our Nikon Studio, if you are using any of the Adobe products, I would recommend probably the high efficiency star. Yeah.
If I was shooting until I got my Z9, I was shooting with a D850.
Mm-hmm.
And before that, the D810. And I was always looking at a file size of around 96 megabits. Why am I getting smaller files? Are they good?
So the question is, gentleman was shooting with a D850 and a D810. He was always getting file sizes of around 95 megs. Why are we getting smaller ones? And does that mean that they're worse? And the answer is, you were probably shooting uncompressed at 14-bit. So we don't have an uncompressed option. With the Z7 II we do, and I could make that equal. But with the Z9, it's been shown through a lot of examples that I've seen that uncompressed and lossless compressed, literally no difference. Literally no difference. So if you take that out of the equation, so if you take the uncompressed out of the equation, you'd instantly be down quite a bit already. And at that point, you would probably be at about, I would guess, between 50 and 60 megs. I'm kind of doing that off the top of my head. And then if you jump into either of these, it jumps down considerably even more. So it's definitely not worse. It's just a different file compression type that we didn't even include here because we've essentially found there's no difference between them. All right, so how to set up your EVF or your LCD screen. So there's a number of different options here. I'm going to kind of touch on a few of the smaller ones. First being Finder display size. Now, the nice thing about this is that if you were to normally have the standard option set up, depending on if you wear glasses, if you wear sunglasses, if you do have to be a little bit further away from the actual viewfinder itself, or you just find it more comfortable, you'll sometimes find that some of the corners are completely cut off, and you're not getting all the information that you, the photographer, actually want. Well, by going and using the small viewfinder, it literally just makes it a little bit smaller. So it's not going to be useful for absolutely every photographer out there who's using a Z9, but for those who do want that smaller size, it's a really nice little feature to have. All right, so under view mode, if you go through here, now, this is what I would recommend for most shooting situations. Show effects of your settings. This just means you're getting the benefit of a mirrorless camera. You're getting the simulated exposure. That's what we bought a mirrorless camera for. That's good. But there are some times where, for whatever reason, you might prefer it, or you might be forced to use adjust for ease of viewing, such as if you're using speed lights on your camera, if you're using strobes in a studio, you're not going to have the ability to see your exposure preview. Well, what if you go to adjust for ease of viewing? There is a custom setting. So let's say you're shooting in a studio and you want punchier colors, you want the shadows brought up, you want a custom view that you're not going to be seeing because your camera essentially cancels it out because you're using other than ambient light to shoot with? Well, you can go into this and you can set all these different options to give you a custom viewfinder look. Kind of cool. Again, not for everybody, but if you do, and strobes is a big one, and a studio is a big one that really kind of stands out to me for why you would be forced to not go and utilize this, but it's a nice little option to have. Now, release timing indicator, you have 3 of them. You have type A, type B, type C, well, I guess, and then off. Now, this just means because of our dual stream technology, as you're firing with the Z9, there's no lag, there's no blackout, there's no nothing to actually indicate that you're taking photos. And when the camera can go and shoot at 20, 30, 120 frames a second, you sometimes want to know when you're taking that many photos. So how can you go and do it? Well, if you go type B, you're going to have lines pop up on all different sides. This is one that I actually prefer. But if you actually go to different option, if you go to type A, this is one I would highly recommend no one to use because you've spent $6,500 on a camera to remove blackout, and then you're only going to go and shoot a photo with blackout. I'm sure there's some case use out there for it, but for me, I don't really recommend it all that often. And then type C is very similar to type B, except it's not all top, bottom, left, right. It's only the left and right pops up. So it just depends on which you prefer. Now this is a cool one because a lot of us are used to, if we have, how many of us here have shot with a mirrorless camera prior to the Z9? Specifically, let's say a Z series prior to. So one of the things I'm asked a lot about is, okay, I want to cycle through my different displays. I want to be able to see my information, or I want it all completely gone, or I want to see a histogram, or I want to see the virtual horizon, or I want the virtual horizon and the histogram. And the answer up until now has always been, nope, you get what the camera gives you, which works in most situations. But with the Z9, you're able to use the monitor, so D18 and D19, so custom monitor and custom viewfinder, they're separate. And you're able to go into 4 or 5 options, depending on which one you're looking at. And if you click from here, the right key, it's going to kick you into this. And you can now go and tell it, do you want the simple? Do you want detailed? Do you want the virtual horizon, the histogram? Do you want them all on? Do you want the framing grid display? So you can really go and customize the LCD and the viewfinder, but also to have them separate as well. Because some people, they want different things shown when they're holding the camera out, if they're shooting landscapes work on a tripod, or if they're shooting fast-paced action up to their eye. All right, do we have any night photographers in here? Okay, cool. So I don't think a lot of photographers expected the Z9 to have as many night kind of centric options when we first came out with it, because everybody was just talking about the speed, the autofocus, the video, but there was quite a few little night centric options, which I'm not going to touch on all of them, but I'll go through a few. So the first being extended shutter speeds. So if you go into this will now give you the ability to shoot up to 900 seconds of an exposure, which is always a nice thing to have. With Firmware 2.0, we made that even a little bit better. And let's say you wanted to shoot for 3 minutes and 34 seconds. Well, okay, you're going to have to go into bulb mode. And then how are you going to know it's going to be 3 minutes and 34 seconds? Well, you're going to have to go pull out your phone, get a timer, and when you press go, and then you literally have to sit there and wait as your phone ticks up. Now, you get a nice little count up. So it'll go all the way through up to 12 minutes, 13 seconds, and then you can stop it whenever you want. So nice little feature. Now you also have D10 starlight view. Now this doesn't really, in my opinion, really show off what the feature is capable of doing. And I got a lot of people just going, what is going on here? So with Starlight View, when you go and turn this on, it's going to do a number of things. The first is it's going to actually brighten up your viewfinder display. Now, it's not going to brighten up your exposure, right? So it's not going to brighten up your resulting photo. It's just for you as the photographer to better be able to frame your shot. Because we've all had times when we've been shooting and you have dark silhouetted trees against a dark sky, against a dark house that you're going to be lighting up in a minute. How are you going to be able to go and visualize all of this? It's tricky. You kind of have to do a lot of trial and error. Now, you turn on Starlight View, it's instantly going to up your exposure by around 3 stops. It's not exact, but around 3 stops. So you can now go and kind of visualize and compose your shot better. But it's also going to go and give you better low light focusing. If anybody has a Z6, Z7, there were autofocus modes in there that helped you in low light. That's exactly what this is also doing as well. So it's going to increase your low light, I'll say accuracy when you're shooting very low contrast scenes like trees off in the distance. I've actually even got this to focus on stars up in the night sky. Now, only use this when you're locked down on a tripod, when your autofocus can be slow, because this does slow the AF down, so it is absolutely not for fast-moving subjects. And then lastly, D11, warm display colors. If you're out shooting for hours, you generally want to try and keep your night vision as good as it can be. You're out there in the middle of the night, you want to be flashing your eyes to kind of readjust all the time between your environment and your camera. So by you going to mode 1, you probably can't see it very well because it's not designed to be seen in good light, but it's going to turn all of your menus, all your playback options to this kind of black and red view. And you're also going to go and get that on the photo side as well. So when you're actually composing your shot, it's going to make sure that it's not going to ruin your night vision at all. Mode 2 is going to keep your scene naturally lit, but it's still going to keep all the buttons, all the infographics in red. Okay, so there's a couple autofocus, sorry. There's a lot of autofocus customizations. A lot. So I'm only going to really touch on a couple because we could be here a very, very long time if I didn't. So the first one is one that I just really like, and it's A11. So it's focus point display. Now, by default, when you grab your Z9 out of the box, when you go home and pick it up for the first time, I'm just pointing out a gentleman who just got his like an hour ago. If you go and utilize any of these subject tracking modes, you're going to see a yellow box. Yellow works, but some people want something with a little bit more high contrast, or they also want the ability to see when the camera tells them it's red, out of focus, it's green, it's in focus. So by going to A11, AFC in focus display, turn that on. That's number one thing I always do. I always go and turn that on because I like the green and red bouncing back and forth. I say bouncing back and forth. 99% of the time, it's going to be green. And then F2 customized controls. This in itself is an entire seminar. It truly is. Whether we're talking about just customizing some of the other features of the camera, but also just the autofocus, because there's so many different ways you can go and set this camera up. So without going too deep down the rabbit hole, because you really can. You can set it up to change autofocus modes on the fly. There's so much to do with it. I'm really going to talk about just a couple quick little options because, as you can see, there are a lot of options. There's 26 different options for each, well, for most of these customized controls within F2. One of my favorites is AF area mode plus AF on. Now, the reason I like this is because I'm a back button focuser. So this is specifically for back button focusers. If you are not a back button focuser, that's totally okay. There's nothing wrong with you. I promise. There's actually a lot of photographers that back in the DSLR days, if you were sports and action, you were pretty much a back button focuser entirely. But I've actually seen quite a few photographers now who've picked up the Z9 who are finding that by utilizing, let's say, AF area mode, the one right above it, you're able to have such flexibility with the Z9's capabilities that people are going from back button to front button because it's just one less thing that they have to do, and they can go and have now another customizable button to do something else for them. So there's no right or wrong way. Anybody who tells you that is probably lying to you. But for me, as a back button focuser, AF area mode plus AF on, what that allows me to do is customize. Let's say we're talking about the function 1 button. So I told you before that 3D is my autofocus mode of choice. So I'll have 3D set up to be my main autofocus. But as I told you, there are times where wide area or dynamic works better for me. So let's say I want to go and choose my function 1 button. So by going down to dynamic medium, anytime I press this button, not only is it going to change to dynamic medium, but it's also going to activate autofocus. So I told you I'm a back button shooter. Well, I don't have to touch the back AF on button anymore. With one button push, it's now switching to dynamic and activating autofocus. And then I just fire, 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 fire when I'm all set. So I would go and do this a couple times, depending on what it is I'm shooting, so that literally I'm 3D autofocus in most of the shooting. I would have, let's say, wide area for function 1, and then I would have dynamic for function 2. So I have basically all my bases covered, no matter what my situation is that I'm actually shooting it. So that's a really, really easy way to customize your camera based on the autofocus modes that you're using. Now, you might say, I only shoot portraits. Then you know what? Totally fine. You're not going to deal with really heavy autofocus use. But if you're dealing with sports, wildlife, birds in flight in particular, there are going to be certain situations where you're going to want to be jumping back and forth. And as fast as this little switch is to jump from your autofocus modes and the AFS, AFC, it's going to lose you a little bit of time. If you have it preset for one button, it's just going to make sure that you're able to capture that action much, much faster.
Now, when you do that, does it change it until you change it back, or does it change it only while you're holding the button?
So the question for those watching is, when you push and hold it, when does it disengage? So the answer is when you push and then let go. So if you want it to hold, it does not do that. It's only going to be active to that new autofocus mode while you're actually pressing and holding it down. And that brings me very nicely to this last little option. So recall shooting functions. So recall shooting functions. If you remember way back at the beginning of the presentation when I talked about subject detection, I said that there is a way to turn off subject detection. Why you want to is a different matter, but if you want to, how do you go ahead and do it? Well, there's a couple ways. You can go and set that to be the top menu in your My menu, so it's still a couple button pushes, or you can go and use recall shooting functions. So recall shooting functions, once you go into it, what you'll see is all of these different options. Shooting mode, shutter speed, aperture, exposure comp, ISO, and then the big ones, AF subject detection options, which is for this example, and then you can all even go down to release mode. So if we were to do that for this example, we would go into AF subject detection options, and it's right now set to auto, but let's say I want it to be off. So if I'm going to go and set my recall shooting functions to FN1, let's say we're not using all of the autofocus things that I just talked about, with one button push, all of these other boxes are unticked. All right, so it's not paying attention to any of these except AF subject detection options, and it's off. That means that with one button push, I'm instantly going to jump and turn subject detection off. That works as a way to do it, but I would say a more usable situation for why to use recall shooting functions is if you continuously use completely different exposure settings for whatever reason. So if let's say you're shooting a bear, he's at a river and he's grabbing at fishes as they're jumping up. Well, you want to be in fast shutter speeds, probably higher ISOs, you're going to be under tree cover. So those are going to be your main settings. But as the bear dunks his head under the water, what's he going to do when he comes back up? He's going to shake. Now, what happens if you're wanting to capture that not as a fast action, actually capturing all those drops, but you want a nice slow shutter speed to that? Well, okay, so you're going to dial down your shutter speed, you're going to open up your aperture, you're going to do all the lower your ISO. Doing it once or twice, okay, fine. But if you're going to be with this animal for 15, 20 minutes, you might be jumping back and forth between these fast shutter speed and slow shutter speed settings quite quickly, and it could be a bit of a pain in the butt. So recall shooting functions now allows you, with one button push, to jump to your shutter priority, 1/30th of a second, ISO 64 option that you've already preset as your slow shutter speed. Now,
Is that a push and hold?
you took it right out of my mouth. So with Firmware 2.0, it is now your choice. So if you want to push it and have it be engaged only as long as the button is held in, then it's the first option. If you want it to be a toggle where you push it and it's active, 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 either until you turn the camera off or the timer comes in, or you push the button again, you go to the hold function. So you get the option. So there is a lot to go through with this. I'm pretty much done, and I'm actually on time, which is kind of nice. I bet Russ is sitting there going, damn, I lost the bet. I thought he would go long. I like to talk. Are there any questions that we have here in the audience versus online? Whew.
Chris, with the tracking, is there any big difference between just keeping it on auto or actually specifying people or cars, or is it?
That's a good question. So the question was, when with the subject detection options, we obviously have animals, humans, vehicles. Why would you turn it off auto? And in my experience, I only pretty much keep it on auto. I've seen some videos online stating that in certain lighting conditions and really tricky conditions, they found that, let's say, birds might get picked up a little bit better when you go dedicated animal mode. I haven't seen that myself. I've never seen that verified by Nikon, that in certain conditions. So to me, there isn't a lot of reason to do it. The only reason I've ever actually done it is when I go and shoot my videos in my kitchen. I have my computer sitting about 2 feet behind me. And for whatever reason, when I first started recording it, I put a picture of an elephant on there. Well, when I'm sitting there and I have the camera set to AFF, so the camera's continuously going to be focusing, if I'm sitting talking to the camera and I cover my face with a lens, let's say I'm showing this new 800mm, what's the camera going to do? It's going to look for the next subject. It's going to grab the elephant. So when I was doing some testing, I actually noticed, why is the camera doing, well, it's stupid, Z. Oh, it's actually doing an incredibly smart thing. It's going to the, so I actually go and turn only human detect on, so that if it doesn't see me, it'll go and actually pick up the lens, the object that I'm putting in front of me. So there aren't a ton of reasons that I've found. There might be a few, but I've never seen them kind of proven in a repeatable manner. Oh, I got one, and then I'll go to you.
Yeah, we have one in the chat here from Joseph. If Adobe Premiere supports ProRes RAW from Nikon, do you know?
No. So I didn't mention it. So as of right now, and I don't know if this, I don't have any information. It's all kind of TBD. But for right now, the NRAW is only editable, fully editable, by using DaVinci Resolve. So DaVinci Resolve, there's another one, EDS, but EDS isn't a full workflow because if you shoot in 8K, it's actually going to downscale it to 4K, so it's not fully usable, unlike it is with DaVinci Resolve. So as of right now, Joseph, I don't know.
Okay, and one more video-related question here from Panoptic. Will the camera sport manual cine lenses?
Are we gonna? Is he asking? Are we gonna come out with cine lenses?
I think just support for current manual cine lenses.
I'm seeing one of the TCS staff asking, please. I don't know. We'll have to kind of check on that. That's one of those things that until it gets released, we probably won't know.
Just wondering, is there any reason you would not want the sensor shield to close when you turn it off?
So the question is there any reason why you would not want the sensor shield to close? No. I have mine automatically set to close all the time. If you're doing a sensor cleaning, then you obviously would want it to stay open when you turn the camera off and pull the lens off. Other than that, I can't think of any, to be totally honest with you. I would, yeah.
The only reason I heard for that is that it's really delicate, so you have to be careful not to damage it if you're trying to put on a lens.
Yeah, I would say that's actually going to be less delicate because one of the reasons we did that, and we don't do that with, let's say, a Z6 II, Z7 II, we have the ability to code that to say, hey, keep the Z7's mechanical shutter open, because it would be doing the same thing. It would be blocking dust from coming in. The mechanical shutter of cameras are incredibly fragile, really, really fragile. They're very lightweight because they have to move so darn quickly. But at the same time, it's only in the axis that they move that they are very strong. So if you do touch them, so I would actually say I have more confidence touching this shutter shield than I would a mechanical shutter. So I get what you're saying, but I think that more applies to a mechanical shutter than the shutter shield.
Availability. I ordered one of these in mid-November last year. So I waited 5 months. When are they
Well, so
going to be available?
the question is about availability, and my answer is going to be one of, please be patient with us. We have not, it's not as if we've only shipped the 5 in this room to the whole country. We've shipped hundreds. We've shipped many, many cameras. So unfortunately, depending on where you are on the list of your store, I'm assuming you're with TCS, that's going to be dependent on how many were before you, and we're trying to get out as many as we can. So all I have to say is, please be patient with us. We're getting out as many as we possibly can, and we've shipped a lot already, but we do realize that there's still a lot in the back order list, but we're getting through them as fast as we can.
Is the output going to be as slow with the 800 lens?
I don't have exact numbers as to what we're shipping. I would tell you that demand is as popular of a lens as we thought it was going to be. For an $8,000 lens, it's incredibly popular. So we're trying our best with this one, and we're going to be trying our best with this one as well. But I have a feeling that this one's going to be back ordered for a decent chunk of time as well. Internet.
All right, we have some more internet questions from Panoptic. What do you think about the camera will perform in critical weather conditions? How can I increase my camera's battery life? Some optimization tips.
Oh, some optimization tips. So one of the things I didn't actually talk about is with Firmware 2.0. So the little button on the I was going to call it the prism, but it's not really the prism anymore. On the top of the camera, this lets you cycle through whether you want automatic display, so that when you have the camera away from you, this will be turned on. And then when you go and cover it, it's going to switch to the EVF. So you can go and do this a couple ways. You can have monitor only, you can have EVF only, or you can have what I kind of call DSLR mode. So it's prioritize the EVF. With Firmware 2.0, we actually tweaked it a little bit, and I didn't actually even read about it in the on our firmware page. But what it essentially does is, if you had firmware non 2.0, and you pressed the shutter halfway, but your eye was not going and pressed up against this, the camera would not turn on the EVF. So let's say you're on the sideline shooting football, and you have your camera up on a monopod, and you see that the action is happening, and you're getting ready for it, but you don't want to miss any of the action. But you don't want to have your eye pressed to it because you kind of want to see where the scene is going. So if you half pressed before, it wouldn't do anything. You would have to wait until you got your eye to the viewfinder before it would turn on. Now, that makes sense. It's trying to maximize your battery life, but it means that for critical moments, you could sometimes miss it if you're just bringing the camera up to your eye. Now, with Firmware 2.0, if you have it set to prioritize viewfinder, if you half press the shutter, even if it's not up to you, it's actually going to turn on the EVF so that it's ready the second it's up to your eye. So one way that I would recommend the person to help their battery life, turn on prioritize EVF. I would also recommend to turn, if you go into, and I'm done here, so I will go and grab this. So if you go into the custom settings menu and you go to power off delay, this is a nice one for you to be able to customize. So standby timer, if you find that you're not utilizing the camera all that much in between action, I would turn that to be quite small, maybe 10, 20, 30 seconds. That just means that in 20 seconds time, the camera will essentially turn itself off if you haven't touched it at all. So that'll really cut down on the battery life. And then the last thing I would say is that if you are shooting in cold situations, obviously everybody always knows, if you are going to have a second battery with you, have it on you kind of somewhere, keeping it nice and warm. And then when you swap it in, it'll be less drained than if it were out in the minus 30, minus 40, minus 50 degree weather that you guys get here in Alberta.
All right, there's one more internet question before we let the live audience go. So any info on Nikon as to low light video performance as Sony always promotes?
That's a good question. I hate ending a seminar on an I don't know, but that's actually something that I looked into last week. I was trying to find our information on what the low light video and I could not find it. So this is one of those things where we haven't made it public, which usually if it's not made public, we're not going to make it public. I have asked the question though, so we'll wait to see if I get an answer back.
Okay, sounds good. Well, thanks so much, Chris. And I just want to thank again Nikon Canada for making all this happen, as well to Delkin for doing a memory card giveaway, which we will give out to a lucky person from our in-person audience shortly. But yeah, make sure that you subscribe and hit the notification bell if you want to check out more live content. This is our very first experiment of doing a hybrid event. We hope you enjoyed. And we'd love to see all of your great comments below. Thank you.